The snobby, goofy Mafia king and the black stripper he can't stop watching. The velvet room pulsed with low lights and muted music as a man sat alone in a corner booth. His charcoal Brioni suit was immaculate, his horn-rimmed glasses catching the glow of the stage. Domenico Valenti, the North Side's most feared Mafia boss, gripped his espresso cup too tightly. His hands shook, and he had just spilled coffee on his white shirt for the third time this week. On the stage, a woman with deep brown skin moved with absolute control of her presence. Zara Kinsley commanded every eye in the room without effort. She had no idea that the nervous man in the corner had been watching her every night for 2 weeks, memorizing her schedule, noting her car, even tracking her academic work. Tonight, the city was under a winter storm that had emptied streets and clubs alike. Snow and wind forced a rare confrontation. When their eyes finally met at close range, Dom felt a rush of something he had never experienced before. An awareness that his carefully ordered life was about to collide with someone he could not control. Neither of them knew how this encounter would change everything. What would you do if someone powerful and untouchable became completely undone by one person? Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from, Chicago, New York, or somewhere else in the world. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because tomorrow we're sharing another story that will grip you from the first second. Your support lets us bring more intense, unforgettable stories straight to you. Let's begin. Domenico Valenti moved through Chicago like a man whose presence alone could reshape reality. As the third-generation head of the Valenti crime family, he inherited not just wealth, but a network forged in blood and strategy stretching back to Prohibition. His influence extended from the glittering Magnificent Mile to the industrial corridors of Pilsen, from the closed-door meetings in City Hall to the quiet residential streets of Lincoln Park. His brownstone on Astor Street in the Gold Coast was more than a home, it was a fortress, a carefully curated statement of power and taste. From the towering heights of Willis Tower, he oversaw legitimate ventures, construction companies, restaurants, and real estate holdings. From the shadows of a private River North club, he managed the operations that maintained his family's reputation and dominance across the city. Despite his reach, Domenico was a contradiction. He spoke 4 languages fluently, could recite Dante's Inferno in the original Italian, and maintained a library of first-edition books organized according to a system so intricate even his closest advisors could not decipher it. Yet, he had tripped over his own feet once while attempting to intimidate a rival, hitting his head against a desk corner and losing consciousness for a brief but humiliating moment. He alphabetized his weapons, demanded a 17-step process for washing his cars, and carried hand sanitizer in every pocket. His vocabulary was so precise that even his trusted men would reach for their phones to look up words, only to be met with a high-pitched giggle that broke the tension he had created. To those who worked for him, Dom was unpredictable in ways that kept the organization both obedient and on edge. One moment he would lecture his underbosses on the philosophical foundations of their enterprise, quoting Machiavelli and adjusting his horn-rimmed glasses like a scholar. The next, he would make a decision so cold and calculated that it reminded everyone whose blood ran through their veins. His neurotic behaviors created confusion among subordinates and gave rivals openings they were too afraid to exploit for long. His father, retired in Lake Como, received weekly reports detailing his son's decisions and quirks, growing increasingly concerned that the man tasked with leading the family might be losing control. Yet for all the power, wealth, and fear Dom commanded, he had never experienced love. Women were drawn to him for his reputation, the cut of his suits, the danger he represented. They were captivated by the legend, never noticing the man who meticulously color-coordinated his sock drawer or suffered a full emotional collapse when his favorite pen ran dry. He lived a life of refined isolation, a controlled existence where nothing was left to chance, and everything was catalogued, sanitized, and managed. His days followed rigid routines, his nights filled with calculated meetings, and yet in the depths of his private hours, there was a quiet emptiness that no luxury could fill. That emptiness persisted until a cold January night drew him far from his North Side stronghold into a territory he had never cared to know. A simple decision by a childhood friend would shift the axis of his life, sending him into a space he had previously avoided and confronting him with a presence that his carefully ordered world had no defense against. Domenico Valenti, the snobby, meticulous, awkwardly endearing king of the North Side, was about to encounter a woman who would see him as he truly was, not as a boss, not as a figure of fear, not as the man who managed empires with surgical precision, but as the fragile, human soul beneath the Brioni suits and high-stakes decisions. Nico Ferraro had a talent for dragging Domenico Valenti into situations Dom had spent years avoiding. On a cold Thursday night, that talent was in full force as Nico steered their blacked-out SUV off Lakeshore Drive and deeper into the south side than Dom had ever willingly traveled. Their destination was the Velvet Room, a long-standing club on 79th Street in the heart of the Chatham neighborhood. It had been open since the 1970s, surviving ownership changes, neighborhood shifts, and the rise of newer venues. Nico insisted they were meeting a neutral territory contact here, someone who refused to set foot in River North or the Gold Coast. Dom had argued that any competent negotiator should agree to a rendezvous somewhere with decent ventilation and reliable hand soap, but Nico refused to budge. As they approached the Chatham blocks, Dom's complaints began. He commented on the uneven road texture, the way the heating system in the SUV emitted a sound he claimed was aggressively inconsistent, and he insisted the route Nico chose added an unnecessary 7 minutes to their arrival time. When they pulled up to the Velvet Room, Dom took one look at the entrance and began quietly cataloging every perceived violation: a loose awning bolt, a flickering wall sconce, and a faint smell of fried food he swore had been cooked in oil that needed replacing. Nico ignored him and led the way inside, pushing through the main doors and into a space washed in deep reds and purples. The sound system hummed through the room, the bass rolling across the floor. Dom kept close to the wall at first, like he was trying to avoid making physical contact with anything he hadn't personally sanitized. This place was worlds away from his usual haunts. Wine bars in Wicker Park where servers described flavor profiles with unnecessary enthusiasm, or private lounges in the Gold Coast where the lighting was soft and the staff wore gloves. Here, the air was thicker, warmer, alive with energy he wasn't accustomed to. Dom had barely settled into the corner booth, a booth Nico claimed had good visibility, but Dom insisted faced the wrong direction, when he began whispering his frustrations. The table had a scratch he didn't approve of. The seat was too soft. The lighting angle created an uneven reflection on his glasses. He muttered about the airflow, convinced the vents were outdated. Nico hushed him more than once, reminding him they were here for work. That reminder evaporated the instant she walked onto the stage. Zara Kinsley stepped into the light with the kind of presence that didn't ask for attention. It commanded it. She wore confidence like a second skin, moving with strength and fluid control that made every shift of her body deliberate. The lights caught her deep brown skin with a glow that seemed to hold the room captive. Dom, who had just opened his mouth to comment on the temperature, stopped mid-sentence. His posture changed immediately. His fidgeting ceased. His restless focus sharpened into something intense but quiet, as if the room had narrowed down to a single point. Nico didn't notice at first. He was too busy checking his phone for messages from the contact they were supposed to meet. But when Dom didn't respond to a question, Nico turned and found his friend frozen, staring at the stage with an expression he had never seen from the North Side boss. Dom's jaw had gone slack. His glasses had fogged slightly from the heat of the room and his own breath. His fingers loosened on his espresso cup until a small drop spilled onto his knuckle. He didn't react. Zara moved as though she was born on that stage. 28, raised in Bronzeville, and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who understood her worth. Her steps were smooth and balanced, grounded yet fluid. She didn't perform for approval, she performed with direction, as though her body was following choreography she had crafted with intention. Every shift of movement spoke of training, discipline, strength. Her eyes, dark and perceptive, held a level of intelligence that made the performance feel layered, not just entertainment but expression. Dom felt something inside himself react with a force he wasn't prepared for. Thoughts collided. His breathing changed. His usual superiority, The calm detachment he had mastered over the years crumbled without warning. Nico noticed when Dom whispered something barely audible, approximately 5'8", musculature consistent with formal dance training, and eyes that looked directly into one's soul with neither artifice nor evasion. Nico blinked. "You all right, Dom?" Dom didn't answer. His gaze stayed locked on the stage. From that first night, Dom's routine changed. He returned to the Velvet Room the next evening. And the night after that. Within a week, he had become a fixture in the same corner booth, always ordering the same drink he never quite finished. Espresso first, then occasionally water, though he scrutinized the glass every time before taking a sip. The staff began to recognize him, though they kept their distance. Something about his presence suggested importance, but also a kind of unpredictability no one wanted to test. Dom learned Zara's schedule faster than he expected, Thursday through Sunday, main stage at 11 o'clock. He noted her arrival time, her exit patterns, the precise minutes she stepped off the stage between sets. He memorized the song tied to her signature routine, downloaded it, and played it repeatedly. So many times Nico eventually asked him if he was studying the composition for a research project. Dom didn't answer that either. His interest grew into a fixation he tried to justify with logic. He told himself he needed to understand the environment since it was outside his usual territory. He told himself Zara's performance had simply caught his attention the way skilled artistry often did. But the truth sat heavy in his chest each night he found himself staring at the stage, unable to focus on anything else. By the second week, Dom had discreetly assigned 2 men to watch the area. Not to follow Zara directly, but to assess potential risks during their South Side visits. That was the official reason. The real one was something Dom couldn't articulate. He needed to know more about her. Not in a way that invaded her privacy, not in a way that crossed moral boundaries, but enough to understand the person who had, for the first time in his life, disrupted the internal quiet he had come to accept as permanent. The information they gathered surprised him. Zara wasn't the mystery he expected. She wasn't wrapped in hidden scandals or dangerous affiliations. She lived with purpose and direction. She was a graduate student at the University of Chicago, deep in a doctoral program studying sociology. Her academic focus was economic mobility in urban communities. Topics Dom had only glanced at in passing, yet now found himself reading about in the middle of the night. She danced because she refused to allow student loans to swallow her life and future. Every shift at the club was a step toward maintaining financial independence while pursuing the work she cared about. She didn't just write papers, she published them. 2 so far, both well received in academic circles. She also volunteered at a youth center in Englewood, spending her days off tutoring teens, organizing workshops, and showing up for people who needed guidance. Her life carried weight and direction, both of which caught Dom off guard. He had expected mystery. He found substance. Night after night, he watched her in a way that wasn't satisfied by the distance. It wasn't desire alone, though that was a part of it. It was something deeper, something he didn't have language for. He observed the way she reclaimed the stage with strength. The way she carried herself before and after performances. The way her eyes tracked the room, aware but never alarmed. She didn't shrink from the world. She met it head-on. Dom felt something stirring, an internal shift he couldn't categorize. It wasn't the chaos he feared. It wasn't the emptiness he had grown used to. It was something alive, something steady, something impossible to ignore. By the end of the second week, Nico finally confronted him. "You know," Nico said quietly, sliding into the booth beside him, "if you stare any harder, you're going to burn a hole through the stage." Dom kept watching. "I am simply observing." "You've been observing for 2 weeks." "She has a compelling presence," Dom murmured, adjusting his glasses. Nico smirked. "Presence, huh? Is that what we're calling it?" Dom didn't reply. His eyes stayed fixed on Zara. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know yet, was that a winter storm was approaching. One that would cut off roads, empty the club early, and force a conversation neither of them had planned for. And for the first time since taking over the North Side, Domenico Valenti felt something he couldn't control, measure, or analyze. Something that kept pulling him back to the same booth, to the same hour, to the same woman whose life was so far removed from his own. Something he had no words for. Not yet. The week following Dom's first full observation of Zara passed with a tension he had never known. Orders were misfiled. Meetings that normally ran like clockwork ended in chaos. He forgot the name of a city alderman he had been bribing for years. A shipment schedule went wrong, costing the organization $300,000. A figure Dom calculated immediately, muttering under his breath, but not enough to correct the error before it was noticed. During a meeting with two lieutenants, he walked into a wall while thinking about how Zara's hair fell across her shoulders as she stepped off the stage. The memory burned with a clarity that made him flinch. His father called from Lake Como, voice crisp but concerned, demanding explanations he could not provide without revealing his distraction. Dom laughed nervously, citing minor administrative errors, but the tension behind his words was visible. He had never felt so out of control, and the realization unsettled him more than any rival ever had. Meanwhile, Zara noticed the man who had become a fixture in the corner booth. She had developed instincts over years of navigating spaces where women were constantly evaluated, measured, and approached without consent. At first glance, Dom looked out of place. His suits were tailored to perfection, a contrast to the velvet-draped walls and neon stage lights. His movements were precise but tense, fingers fiddling with glasses or napkins. There was an awkwardness to him, yet it was not the usual predatory attention she had grown accustomed to. He never attempted to touch her. He never shouted lewd comments. And yet, his gaze lingered, intense and unwavering. There was a force to his attention that could have frightened her, but it did not. That fact unsettled her more than anything else. The night the storm hit, Chicago became a city transformed. Winds cut through streets with a -30 wind chill, snow piling high, halting most traffic. The Velvet Room, normally vibrant and full, was almost empty. Only the most dedicated patrons braved the weather. The heating system failed midway through the evening, and the manager decided to close early, paying Zara for her full shift. She shrugged off the disappointment of leaving prematurely and gathered her things, layering her heavy winter coat over jeans and boots. Frustration showed in the set of her shoulders, and she cursed under her breath about the streets she would now have to navigate alone. Dom was already outside, waiting by his car. His vehicle, an armored SUV with snow tires and four-wheel drive, stood ready in the lot. He stepped forward, hands tucked in gloves, glasses fogged slightly from the frigid air. Zara froze for a moment, recognizing him immediately from her shifts. He looked out of place in this environment, expensive, precise, conspicuously overprepared. And yet, he radiated the same focus she had observed from afar. There was nothing casual about his presence. It held gravity. "I noticed your Honda's all-season tires," he blurted, voice tight with nervous energy. "They're inadequate for the amount of snow accumulated tonight." Zara stopped, one eyebrow raised. "How do you know what tires I have?" Her tone was sharp, a mix of curiosity and warning. Dom's face went red, the first time in 34 years anyone had witnessed him lose composure so publicly. He cleared his throat, eyes wide, and admitted, "I've been watching you for the last 2 weeks. I know your schedule, your routines. It is not my intention to alarm you." Zara blinked, then laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "You are the weirdest stalker I've ever had." Dom did not flinch. Instead, he held her gaze. "I will provide safe transportation. 4-wheel drive, snow tires, the entire system is equipped for this storm. I also wish to introduce myself properly. My name is Domenico Valenti. You deserve the choice of whether to accept my assistance with all information at hand." Zara considered him, measuring tone, posture, intent. Something in the way he spoke, the careful precision of his words, suggested honesty. It wasn't a bluff or a display of power. It was recognition of risk, acknowledgement of her autonomy. "All right," she said finally, with measured caution. "One ride. You make one mistake, and I will ensure you regret it." Dom inclined his head, expression neutral but internally relieved. He opened the passenger door for her, maintaining distance, letting her enter without a word of unnecessary commentary. She got in, settling herself while he returned to the driver's seat, careful to start the engine slowly to avoid sudden noises that might make her anxious. The SUV hummed quietly as it engaged the snow-ready systems, and he guided the vehicle through streets now coated in ice and snow, tires gripping the frozen asphalt with precision. The drive was silent at first. Dom monitored the road while occasionally glancing at her, ensuring she was comfortable. Zara's eyes scanned the streets, alert to the storm and the city's unusual quiet. She was evaluating him with a critical precision, noting that despite his clearly intimidating presence, he posed no immediate threat. That observation made her uneasy. There was a sharp tension in being watched by someone who didn't rely on threat or intimidation. "You said your name is Domenico Valenti," she said cautiously, breaking the quiet. "Do people usually respond well when you announce yourself like that?" Dom considered the question. Most people recognize the name and respond with either respect or caution. "You appear neither impressed nor alarmed. That is unusual." Zara smirked slightly. "I've been through worse attention than yours. Yours is just strange. Direct, persistent, awkward." Dom allowed himself a brief smile, the kind that did not quite reach his eyes but revealed the smallest fraction of amusement. "Awkward is accurate. I do not perform well under emotional influence." Zara glanced at him, noting the subtle tremor in his hands as they gripped the steering wheel. There was something human in that imperfection, something that defied the image of power, wealth, and control that the name Domenico Valenti carried across Chicago. They continued through the storm, navigating streets where tire tracks and deep snow limited options. Every now and then, Dom offered practical observations: a tree limb blocking part of the sidewalk, a patch of ice forming near a streetlight, the likely duration before main roads would be plowed. Zara listened, evaluating his attention to detail, realizing this was not a man acting out of charm or superficiality. By the time they arrived at her apartment, snow had accumulated several inches, and the night air cut sharply. Dom parked a safe distance from the curb to avoid her car being blocked or damaged. He waited until she stepped out carefully, boots crunching in the fresh snow, coat wrapped tight around her. "Thank you," she said, voice level, holding the door open just long enough to meet his gaze. "I appreciate the caution." Dom inclined his head. "It is my obligation to ensure safety when circumstances permit. Your choice to accept assistance does not obligate you to anything further." She paused, taking in the weight behind his words, the clarity in his voice, the attention to detail, and the absence of any pressure or expectation. "Understood. Good night, Mr. Valenti." He nodded again, and as she entered the building, Dom remained in the car a moment longer, feeling the strange pull of anticipation that had become unfamiliar to him. This was not power or control he was exercising. It was something entirely new, something he could not define. As the SUV's engine shut down, he realized the storm had not just changed the city streets but the course of his own life. For the first time, Dom Valenti faced the reality that observation had grown into something more. Something compelling. Something that would demand attention beyond calculation, beyond strategy, beyond any control he had exercised before. And for Zara, the night would mark the first time she noticed that a man who seemed out of place, awkward, and intense could hold her attention in ways she had not expected. The storm had forced proximity. The storm had forced acknowledgement. And neither of them could ignore the effect it had created. The first conversation was brief, awkward, filled with unspoken assessments. But it had set the stage for something neither Dom nor Zara could have anticipated. A connection born in the midst of chaos, tempered by circumstance, and grounded in the subtle, unspoken recognition of each other's presence. The weeks following the stormed night developed into a rhythm that neither Dom nor Zara could have predicted. Dom's gestures were unusual, precise, almost absurdly meticulous, yet sincere. The first indication of his attention came in the form of books. First edition texts arrived at her apartment with handwritten notes in the margins, quotations highlighted, passages underlined, accompanied by letters that attempted to express what Dom lacked the skill to say aloud. Each book was a puzzle of intellect and emotion, evidence of a mind obsessed not only with control but with understanding. When he attended her graduate seminars, he did so with the same care he brought to every aspect of life. Sitting in the back row, a silent observer at first, he began asking questions that revealed a depth of comprehension she had not expected. Questions that demonstrated he had read her published papers. Questions that forced her to re-evaluate what she thought she knew about the world. She noticed his subtle gestures, how he leaned in when a topic piqued his interest, the way he scribbled notes with a delicate hand. No one else in the room seemed to see him. He existed on the periphery, yet fully engaged, entirely present. Dinner invitations followed. Dom chose restaurants with no printed menus, establishments where the chef knew his name, his preferences, the exact temperature at which a Barolo should be served. One evening, a $300 bottle of wine slipped from his hand during a minor scuffle with the sommelier, a heated debate ensuing about serving temperature. He argued passionately, hands waving, eyes intense, before apologizing profusely and returning to the table as though nothing had occurred. Zara found herself amused, simultaneously captivated and bewildered by the juxtaposition of his wealth, his obsession with minutiae, and the vulnerability that bled through in moments like this. Despite the opulence surrounding their interactions, it was Dom's attentiveness that left the greatest impression. He listened to her research discussions with genuine curiosity, asking follow-up questions that reflected comprehension rather than pretense. He never pressured her physically, never implied that her body was an obligation, and never allowed the shadows of his reputation to intrude on her autonomy. In conversation, he revealed fragments of his childhood, a father who ruled through fear, a mother who had died too young, and the weight of expectations passed down through generations. Occasionally, his composure failed in subtle ways, arriving for a dinner with his shirt inside out, distracted by thoughts of her, fumbling with cufflinks while apologizing with the most sincere humility. Zara struggled to reconcile the contradictions in him. She was fully aware of his life, the blood that funded dinners, the violence that enforced authority, the empire that both inspired awe and demanded caution. Yet, she also observed the man behind the name. The book collector who maintained a private, meticulously organized library. The anonymous donor who contributed to local charities and paid employees' medical expenses in secret. The boss whose associates displayed tension beneath respectful greetings, but whose interaction with her remained consistently human and considerate. She witnessed the transformation in his demeanor after handling business, an emptiness in his eyes that took hours to fade, a reminder of the weight he carried even in private moments. The inevitability of intimacy came not from calculated advances, but from time spent observing and understanding. 3 months after the night of the snowstorm, in the privacy of Dom's Astor Street brownstone bedroom, they crossed the threshold of emotional and physical closeness. The room was luxurious, the sheets more expensive than her monthly rent, but Zara did not notice the cost. Dom, in contrast, fumbled like a teenager, his fingers awkward on buttons, stumbling over the simplest motions. His voice trembled when he spoke, "I want to be worthy of you. I don't know how to be worthy of anyone." She met him halfway, taking his face in her hands. Her lips pressed against his, dissolving every defense he had spent decades constructing. He responded with the intensity of someone untrained in affection but fully committed, hands tentative, unsure, and yet insistent. The kiss was a collapse of control, a surrender to emotion he had never permitted himself. His love, untempered and raw, frightened them both. It was possessive, overwhelming, the kind of devotion that threatened to consume the giver and receiver alike. And yet, there was no threat in his intentions, only an overwhelming desire to prove himself capable of reciprocating her trust. In the following weeks, their interactions deepened into an unconventional courtship. Dom's gestures were thoughtful, meticulous, and often bordering on absurdity in their precision. He would show up at her seminars with notes, ensuring questions were well-researched, demonstrating understanding and interest. He sent flowers occasionally, each arrangement curated according to her documented preferences in past conversations. He was careful, deliberate, and entirely aware of her boundaries. At dinner, he remained attentive, correcting waitstaff discreetly, ensuring that her comfort was prioritized above all else. The collision of his world and hers became evident, yet neither attempted to disguise the stark contrasts, the affluence and danger he embodied, the grounded, purposeful life she led. Zara's perception of Dom shifted gradually. She could see past the reputation to the human being beneath, someone disciplined to obsession, yet capable of extraordinary tenderness. She began to notice his quirks, the things that humanized him, the high-pitched giggle when he stumbled over a word, the fastidiousness with which he organized his personal effects, the care with which he managed his empire without imposing it upon her presence. His vulnerability revealed itself in small, unassuming moments, arriving with mismatched socks, forgetting minor details, or pausing mid-sentence to recall an obscure fact. Each instance left her conflicted, simultaneously recognizing his power and appreciating his humanity. Through these experiences, a rhythm of understanding emerged. Dom's intensity became a source of fascination rather than intimidation. Zara learned to anticipate his movements, to decode his subtle expressions, and to navigate the unexpected eccentricities that accompanied his affection. Their communication transcended words, shared glances, silent acknowledgments, and carefully timed gestures conveyed as much meaning as conversation. The foundation of their courtship rested not on grandiose declarations or displays of wealth, but on a deep recognition of each other's intelligence, values, and boundaries. Physical intimacy followed naturally from this emotional understanding. When it occurred, it was less about passion alone and more about the acknowledgement of vulnerability and trust. In Dom's bedroom, where the trappings of power surrounded them, he was reduced to a man learning to navigate affection, while she discovered the capacity to accept devotion that was both intense and respectful. The act of closeness became a negotiation of desire and restraint, each movement carefully attuned to the other's reactions, each touch carrying the weight of mutual respect and acknowledgement. This courtship illuminated the contradictions within Dom. The man feared exposure, vulnerability, and failure, yet his interactions with Zara revealed a willingness to risk all for genuine connection. He negotiated each encounter with care, demonstrating that love for him was not merely about possession or domination, but about responsibility, attentiveness, and the pursuit of mutual understanding. His unusual gestures, books, dinners, seminar attendance, careful observation, served as vehicles for expression, translating his inexperience in love into tangible forms that communicated commitment and reverence. Zara, in turn, navigated the complexities of loving someone whose life was intertwined with danger, influence, and legacy. She reconciled the stark contrasts, the man who could be ruthless in business yet tender in private, the boss who commanded loyalty and fear yet listened intently and questioned thoughtfully, the figure whose reputation could intimidate an entire city but who approached her with respect and care. Her internal struggle involved acknowledging these realities while embracing the human beneath the mythology, learning to differentiate between the man's nature and the world he inherited. By the end of this period, Dom and Zara's relationship had settled into a delicate equilibrium. Their interactions were marked by care, attentiveness, and the recognition of the boundaries imposed by circumstance. Each meeting reinforced their understanding. Love in this context was a negotiation, an ongoing dialogue that required precision, empathy, and patience. The courtship became an exploration of trust, where gestures, words, and actions were measured to convey commitment without compromising individuality. And so, their dark courtship progressed. It was neither predictable nor conventional. It was built on observation, understanding, and the meticulous demonstration of intent. Dom's actions reflected a combination of obsession, respect, and genuine affection, while Zara's responses demonstrated discernment, courage, and the ability to engage with complexity without surrendering autonomy. The foundation laid during these weeks would define the course of their connection, establishing patterns of care, attention, and mutual acknowledgement that would endure long beyond the initial encounters. Zara's life shifted dramatically after she agreed to step into Dom's world. The modest Hyde Park apartment that had been hers for years became a memory, replaced by the sprawling brownstone on Astor Street. The walls were lined with rare art and books she had never imagined seeing in her life. Even small routines changed. Her Honda was swapped for a Mercedes equipped with bulletproof glass, and discreet security personnel followed her at a distance, always present yet unobtrusive. Access to resources arrived as if by magic. Research grants from anonymous benefactors, introductions to scholars who could accelerate her career, but the speed and ease of these opportunities forced her to pause and consider the cost. She tried not to think too hard about the doors that opened so suddenly, aware that some things were best accepted without question. The reality of Dom's world became impossible to ignore. A man who had threatened Dom's territory was found severely beaten in a Bridgeport alley, an incident that left no room for doubt. A city inspector who took an interest in Valenti construction sites was quietly reassigned to a less significant position, a shift that carried implications Zara could not overlook. The legitimate and illegitimate sides of Dom's empire were inseparable, intricately linked in ways that meant every act of generosity or cruelty carried consequences beyond what she had previously known. The darkness she had chosen to enter had become a permanent residence, an environment she could not simply walk away from. One evening, sitting across from Dom in the brownstone's library, she addressed the tension that had been growing quietly. "I can't pretend this isn't what it is," she said, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly. "I can't pretend you're just a businessman with unusual connections. I need to know who I'm with." Dom regarded her calmly, a hint of his usual highbrow amusement flickering in his eyes, but there was no evasion. "I will never ask you to pretend," he replied evenly. "I will never lie about who I am. I cannot be anyone other than the man I was born to be. This is my inheritance. This is my blood. That will never change." She pressed further, searching for cracks, for reassurance that some part of him could be altered. "Will you ever change?" Dom's answer was simple, unwavering. "I will never be someone else entirely. What I am, I cannot undo. What I am, I cannot escape. You must decide if this is a life you are willing to step into." The room seemed heavier after his words, filled with unspoken truths and the gravity of their choices. The moment for a clean break presented itself clearly, a chance to leave before her life became irrevocably entwined with his. She considered it, weighing independence against desire, freedom against the intensity of a man unlike anyone she had ever known. And yet, she did not take it. Instead, she chose to stay, acknowledging that the path forward would be complicated, demanding, and often frightening. The decision was hers, made fully aware of the cost. From that moment, her life no longer resembled what it had been. Every privilege, every protection, and every risk became part of a reality defined by Dom's presence, a reality where she would confront both the beauty and the danger of loving a Valenti. Zara spoke quietly one evening, the weight of her honesty pressing into the room. "I hate what you do," she said, her eyes steady. "And I hate that I love you anyway." The words hung in the air, blunt and deliberate, confronting Dom with a truth he had long avoided. He exhaled slowly, a sound more vulnerable than she had ever heard from him. "I hate it too," he admitted, the first time he acknowledged the cost of his own existence, the sacrifices that came with power and inheritance. That shared acknowledgement created an intensity between them, a recognition that they were bound by forces larger than either of them could fully control. Their connection became physical in ways that defied restraint. They moved with ferocity, a collision of desire and need, leaving marks that spoke louder than language. Each encounter was an expression of all that could not be spoken, longing, fear, possession, and the understanding that surrendering to one another carried consequences that neither could calculate. In those moments, they were completely themselves. Dom, the Mafia king who could command empires yet tremble over vulnerability, and Zara, a woman who should have known better but chose to embrace both love and danger without hesitation. Through their relationship, the truth of human nature revealed itself. Love did not redeem Dom, it altered him. He continued to run his empire with precision, yet the reflection of himself in Zara's unflinching gaze transformed his awareness. He saw his contradictions, his elegance alongside chaos, intellect beside obsession, not as problems to be solved, but as truths to accept. For Zara, the experience demonstrated the illusion of choice. Her priorities, values, and sense of self shifted, rewritten not by coercion but by the undeniable force of intimacy and trust. The power Dom wielded required acknowledgement, and the relationship endured because Zara refused the willful blindness that others often accepted. Their life together became a careful negotiation between shadow and light. In Chicago, where Lake Michigan meets the skyline, they moved within spaces that combined old money with older blood, a fusion of refinement and inherited authority. Their days blended private dinners, secret meetings, and the quiet, unspoken understanding that their choices carried lasting weight. Every interaction was measured, every gesture loaded with intent. The city continued, indifferent to the dramas of a single family, yet the world they shared felt expansive, dangerous, and entirely theirs. Uncertainty remained, as it must. Whether the structures they had built together, emotional, physical, and strategic, could endure was never guaranteed. Love in this reality came without assurances, only with the honesty of shared vulnerability. Their bond relied not on protection or control, but on mutual acknowledgement of the truth each held. They chose each other fully, aware of the risks and consequences. In that acknowledgement lay the essence of their life together. Dom and Zara existed in a constant negotiation between desire and responsibility, power and tenderness. They did not need rescue or salvation. They needed presence, attention, and the courage to remain committed despite the extraordinary circumstances surrounding them. Their love was neither simple nor safe, yet it was undeniable, a living testament to the choices two people made to embrace one another completely. Some stories of love do not end in light. For Dom and Zara, the conclusion was not a triumph or redemption but a confrontation with the raw reality of being fully seen. They discovered that love could be honest without being easy, that the courage to engage with someone whose shadows match your own is a rare and demanding form of bravery. Many tales offer the comfort of resolution, but there's required endurance, a willingness to navigate complexities with open eyes. The truth they lived with was neither forgiving nor gentle, yet it was authentic and unshakable. Dom, the snobby, eccentric Mafia king who could quote Dante in Italian but could not pour wine without knocking a bottle over, revealed the contradictions of human nature. His brilliance, his obsessive attention to detail, and his occasional social awkwardness coexisted with a capacity for tenderness and deep regard. Zara recognized every facet, every flaw and every idiosyncrasy, and stayed. Her choice was deliberate, informed, and fearless. She saw him not as an archetype of power but as a human being shaped by inheritance, circumstance, and intellect. She witnessed the man behind the empire, understanding the weight he carried and the contradictions he could not escape. Their relationship demanded honesty daily. There were no illusions of protection from the consequences of Dom's life or the weight of his responsibilities. They confronted reality together, the power, the risk, the constant negotiation between desire, obligation, and morality. Each decision reaffirmed that their love was an agreement between equals, grounded in knowledge, respect, and the willingness to accept what others might find unbearable. In this partnership, there was no pretense of light at the end of the tunnel, only the shared reality of two people choosing each other consistently, in spite of everything. In a city defined by its contrasts, from opulent skyscrapers to struggling neighborhoods, they created a private space where truth was paramount. Chicago itself was indifferent, the skyline and Lake Michigan forming a constant backdrop to lives that blended power with vulnerability. Their love was unvarnished and unprotected, yet it thrived precisely because it was acknowledged fully and without denial. Each morning brought decisions, small and large, that reaffirmed their commitment to each other, to face the world in full awareness of its dangers and demands. Ultimately, their story illustrates that love is not always about redemption or comfort. It is about courage, awareness, and the bravery to accept another person entirely. It is about embracing contradictions and choosing to remain present with someone who challenges, inspires, and illuminates your own truth. Dom and Zara's bond was a testament to the value of honest connection over convenience, of deliberate choice over expectation, and of vulnerability as a form of strength. Tonight, somewhere in Chicago, they continue their life together, where power and vulnerability coexist in the same space. The question they leave for us is not whether love can survive darkness, but whether we are willing to confront the truth and accept it fully. Their story is ongoing, living proof that the most profound bonds are forged not in safety, but in the clarity of awareness and the deliberate act of choosing each other every day. Thank you for following this story to the end. If it resonated with you, leave a comment with where you are watching from. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next story, coming tomorrow. Your support helps bring these intense, complex tales to life.